This is the scene outside on May 9th. It is currently around freezing. It's getting a little bit warmer. Snow is starting to melt, but the weather is just definitely not there yet, at least for me personally, to go out traipsing about in, vlog format. So that is going to be coming soon, but for now, just so you can see, I am in Moscow. The weather is just lovely for this time of the year. It happens, I realize that, but it has not happened like this for a very, very long time. Um, so we're going to go back and we're going to, for better or for worse, go back to our regularly scheduled program. So yeah, welcome back to Russia in Context. Yes, as I said, all of the vlog style questions, all those fun little ones in the comments from the last video, such as who I am, or if I'm going to dump on Russia all the time, why am I still here? Questions which I'm pretty sure I answered in the first video I ever made for this channel. You could go check that out, I suppose, but perhaps it's time for a refresher for people who are just coming around now or people who have joined in the last year and a half or so. Anyway, like I said, I will address those soon enough in a video when I'm out walking around the city, just a little bit more of a vlog type. But it's been about 2 weeks since I've done this. There have been a lot of news stories which have accumulated in that period of time. I apologize for the delay. I was off on a little bit of a holiday, but I'm back now. I'm all rested up, so let's get right to it. The 9th of May is Victory Day here in Russia, and as always, there was a military parade across Red Square, down the center of Moscow, and then across Red Square. Wasn't quite as large as it has been in the past. That might have something to do with the army equipment being busy somewhere else. I'm not really sure. Maybe there's some explanation for it. Anyway, this year, just not really too much to mention. There weren't really any foreign guests, just a few who were already in town, because the day before the military parade, on the 8th of May, there was a meeting of, I believe, ODKB, which is the alliance here from a lot of the former Soviet republics, and then the president of one of the African countries, which I can't remember, so I'm just going to put the name down here at the bottom. That president was here because Russia, again, the day before the parade, wrote off all of the country's debts, all 26 million worth of them. And that was pretty much all that there were for foreign politicians here. I'm not really going to say much about the 9th of May. I have mixed feelings about it, not because I'm some dirty Westerner who doesn't appreciate the sacrifice that the Soviet citizens did and they gave, everything that they gave during World War II. That's not the case at all. Maybe just not a fan of how the holiday seems to have transformed over the last decade or so, especially over the last few years or so. But that's a discussion for another time. Certainly not now. We're dealing with the news. That said, one of the major talking points that I ran into again and again here in the run-up to the May holiday, or to the 9th of May in particular, was that the West is trying to steal the holiday, trying to take the holiday from Russia and smear it at the same time, run a smear campaign against it. Now, the first one doesn't make any sense. I don't really know how the West can possibly steal a holiday. I guess maybe they're talking about or alluding to the fact that in the West, they also like to make note of the fact that it wasn't just the Soviet Union who took part in World War II against the fascists, and that they didn't win the conflict alone. Maybe that's what they're referencing when they say that the West is trying to take the holiday. I'm honestly dumbfounded. If somebody has an understanding of what that's all about, please let me know in the comments. About the second part, though, running a smear campaign on the holiday, I can't tell you for sure what exactly that is supposed to mean either, but I don't think I've seen anyone running a smear campaign or read anything that would even closely resemble a smear campaign against the Russian May 9th celebrations. I suppose if in Russia it means that A smear campaign is just non-glowing coverage of the 9th of May celebrations here in Russia, then yeah, if you're going to interpret it as such, then I suppose it's a smear campaign, but that is a hell of a stretch, I would have to say. Now, 2 days before the Victory Day, 9th of May, on the 7th of May, Putin was inaugurated as president for the 5th and certainly not the final time. Again, not too much to report on that. It's the same lineup of faces that we've seen, not at every single inauguration over the last 2 decades, but quite a few familiar faces. I would say that the only new ones at the inauguration this time around were Steven Seagal and Shaman, the weird Russian pop star that just sings songs about like special military operation. Anyway, I don't care about him. We're not going to talk about him. Yeah, the speech that Putin gave at his inauguration is basically the same speech that he's been giving for the last few years or so. Nothing too much to report on there, although there was a little bit of the nuclear saber rattling. He mentioned that the nuclear arsenal is ready to go, and he didn't mention this in the speech, but it does coincide with the fact that Russia and Belarus are going to be holding some tactical nuclear war exercises. I don't know when exactly that's supposed to start, but around this period of time as well. So kind of, I guess, sending a message to everyone, well, specifically the West, again, that he has nuclear weapons and he's ready to use them. I don't know. He said this, I've lost track of how many times already, but it comes up quite a bit. Now, with the inauguration out of the way, one of the first things Putin did was disband the former government, in the sense of the ministers were all let go of their positions, or they continue to fulfill their roles until new ministers and other government officials have been appointed by Putin. Now, in the last few weeks, there's been lots of speculation about who's going to be the new ministers and everything like that. I don't really care. It's pretty much going to be most people returning to the exact same positions they already held. And if the only reason somebody would not go back to their same position is if they like royally screwed up somehow, or if the internal powers that be within the Kremlin, because they are vying for power is money here, and if they somehow manage to get an upper hand on somebody, they manage to put one of their guys into a position of power, it doesn't matter. It's basically going to be the same bland faces that we've been looking at for the last, again, 10 to 20 years. Yeah, there's really not much to be said. The next time I do another news video, I'm sure we'll have a better look at which new faces we might see in the Russian government. When I say government, I mean like the ministries as well. But for now, there's not much to talk about, and I'm not going to speculate. The one fun moment from Putin's inauguration is actually thanks to Patriarch Kirill, who said that, and I quote, "I say boldly, God willing, the end of the century will mark the end of your time in power." Which, the end of the century is, mind you, quick math, 76 years from now. So I don't think Putin will probably live to be 146. He probably has the finances to try to live that long. But yeah, really weird one coming there from Kirill. Putin didn't even bother to try to wave that quote away. He just sort of accepted it gladly. But the best part of the quote, too, is after it circulated for a bit, because clearly that is a insane thing to say, even, if you love the guy all that much. The church later edited the text of Kirill's speech. Like, they just cut that section out of the speech. They just deleted it. And then they removed it from the video. They just edited the video to also remove that section of the speech. So, I don't know. Just fun, because Patriarch Kirill was saying the quiet part out loud, which we all know here in Russia. Putin set out to lay out the plans for his next term, and he actually went ahead and drew up a roadmap through 2036, which would be at the end of his next term, not his 5th term, but his 6th term. So he's already got locked in. 12 more years. Here we go. He clearly plans on sticking around, and it's not like there's really any political system here to prevent him from doing that, or any court system, or any things of those nature. He's good to go. He's drawn up his plans. A few of them, he wants to increase the number of foreign students here in Russia to 500,000 by 2030, which is a 1.5 times increase over the course of 6 years, which I think is going to be a little bit rough, and I'm not really sure how the universities are going to deal with it, but I suppose it's possible. If I remember correctly, earlier this year there was a report saying that especially in the sort of Siberian and far eastern parts of the country, some universities are severely lacking students, so that is potentially doable. Now, which countries they will be coming from, if that's going to be largely China, I'm sure Africa will be represented as well. It remains to be seen. It's not a bad thing. I'm just pointing it out. It does seem perhaps a little, not like wishful thinking, and maybe biting off just a little bit more than is possible at this moment in time. But we'll see how it goes. Again, education is always a good thing, so we can always go for that. Putin also wants to see the percentage of Russian youth who believe that they can achieve self-realization in Russia. He wants that percentage to increase. I don't know by how much. I would assume a substantial amount, because right now it's not super high. I don't have the numbers in front of me. But that's a weird thing to throw out there, like to get people to feel that they can self-realize within a country. I feel like the only way that you can actually do that is to change life for the better here in Russia, so that people actually see that there's going to be long-term changes and that things are going to continue to get better over time. And I don't think most people are realistically seeing that currently. I'm sure some segments of the population are, but a lot of them are not. So again, if he does manage to increase the percentage of young people who believe that they can self-realize here within Russia, then that theoretically would mean that he has improved the quality of life in Russia in 6 years in such a way that everybody is looking forward to the future. So again, I'm not saying it's a bad goal. I'm just saying I don't really understand how it's going to happen. But we have 6 years to wait and see. So I guess check back in a few. And the big focus of all of the new plans, I would say, is focused on history education. Now, I'm not entirely sure if this is just kind of lip service connected to Victory Day, but Putin signed a decree which would create a unified program from preschool all the way through up to university, the goal of which is to increase the knowledge of history of for citizens, and also for foreigners living in Russia. We can get into the education system in Russia another time, but last autumn, there were already issues with the latest edition of the history book, which is currently teaching things that are still ongoing as historical fact. So ignoring that that's not how history works. Even the preschool, starting at the preschool age and then going all the way up to university, that level of, I guess, indoctrination ultimately is a bit, I don't know, it's a bit off for me. I guess the thing is, history for me is not just learn a bunch of facts and spit them back out, which is what a lot of, let's be real, education systems attempt to do. They attempt to simplify it down to just facts and then repetition of facts. But history is actually one of those things that you have to analyze, and there is oftentimes no one correct answer, because history is not exactly objective. It is subjective depending on who you're looking at. Certain facts are true, but there are different interpretations. That's kind of why history is an interesting subject. It's like literature. There isn't necessarily one correct answer. Some people may disagree with me on that one, and I'm not really here to get into a debate of what makes history or doesn't make history an interesting subject, because I'm kind of here right now to tell you the news of what's been happening in Russia over the last week and a half or so, but that's just my take on it. Putin's also worried about video games, which is a topic that has come up quite a bit in the last half a year or so. He's worried about video games, which are literal fantasy for the most part, right? Not giving accurate descriptions of past events. And he wants the government to be more active in the video game industry, just on a whole. I don't know what's going to happen then to like historical fiction or films that play around with historical facts, because maybe he just doesn't know about it yet and nobody's told him. But yeah. That's a hot take on his part right there, that we got to monitor video games because they are presenting a skewed view of history. To be fair, I know Call of Duty and those types of games exist, but let's be real. Teenagers who are playing Call of Duty and Battlezone or Battlefront or whatever the hell they are, they're typically not really going into those games for historical knowledge. So I don't think it's like a huge problem. Anywho, all of this discussion over the last week or so with regards to streamlining historical knowledge and making sure that the historical knowledge aligns with what the Kremlin wants it to align with, brought back, for some reason, the quote. I believe it's Orwell who actually came up with it. Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. 1984, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so the inauguration basically covered, and I mentioned guests already, but I do want to come back around to one of the familiar faces, one of the popular guests on this little segment of the channel, and I'm going to use him as a transition to some updates on stories that I've previously covered. That person at the inauguration was, maybe you guessed it, Ramzan Kadyrov, the president of Chechnya. He was there, of course, and all sorts of people, they were trying to spin his appearance as him looking strong and healthy. He walked up some stairs. That is some big boy stuff right there. He did have help taking his jacket off, but, he's a big boss. Maybe that's a big boss thing. I don't know. And then sometime around the inauguration as well, too, they released a video of him, rocking a car back and forth. Now, again, last video, I talked about how there were these reports that Kadyrov is terminally ill and, his health is declining quickly. So he's just been releasing video after video after video since then where he's trying to show how healthy he is. And that seems like the type of thing a person who's terminally ill would do to try to convince people they're not terminally ill. Also, he does not look like he's having a good time when he's pushing that car back and forth. I mean, my man is bloated. He looks like he's about to burst in some moments. But anywho, that's Kadyrov. Moving on. Timur Ivanov, the right-hand man of Shoigu, who is being charged for receiving benefits and kickbacks from government or military contractors worth, we have a sum now, worth over 1 billion rubles. The press has just chosen to largely ignore this story. At least all of the government-owned press channels. Not sure why they would choose to ignore such a large corruption scandal within the government. That seems like an odd choice on their part. But anywho, this last week, his defense attorney attempted to get him out of jail, to have him placed under house arrest. And in order to do so, what they did is they brought in all of his military medals. And it was bags and bags of just case after case after case of military medals. Now, mind you, Ivanov has not actually served in any sort of active military combat, and my man has literally a tables full of military medals. Now, his plan to get himself placed under house arrest, that did not work. All that worked with this move was it pretty much demonstrated that Russian awards and medals given out for the government are pretty much like participation trophies. Oh, and kind of going off the Ivanov thing, Underneath the last video, I saw some comments about like, well, yeah, there's corruption in Russia, but at least their government's trying to do something about it, and the West has corruption too. Okay, fine, whatever. Like, the whataboutism's stupidest nonsense ever. But there were like 5 other corruption scandals, all connected to government officials or people connected to government officials in the last week or so, since the start of May. I guess that's just like it is in the States. I don't remember that many of it. It's been a while. It's been a while since I've lived in the States. Maybe Virginia's hella corrupt or something. I don't know. Maybe y'all are in some part of England where there are these scandals. I don't know what's going on in your neck of the woods, but it just doesn't feel natural. Anyway, yeah, there were like 5 more of them here, and that was just kind of what I made note of. At a certain point in time, your eyes just gloss over those stories, and you just skim right past them because it's not really interesting at this point in time. Kind of like the ongoing drone strikes and strikes on Belgrade as well. They just keep going on, and you just kind of breeze right past them in the news cycle because they have effectively become background noise for the news cycle. Speaking of background noise, floods, right? The floods are ongoing still. Obviously, the regions that were affected first, like Orenburgskaya Oblast, that situation is better now. The waters, I don't think, are fully receded, but they are for the most part. A lot of people are already back in their homes or what's left of them, and they're kind of assessing the damages. However, in the Tyumenskaya Oblast, which is further, it's into Siberia, flooding has not yet peaked, and it's probably going to continue to get worse for at least the next week or so. This crisis has been going on for, like a month and a half now. It's kind of wild that it is so out of control this year. But it's wildfire season already too. So let's switch over to that, because right now in the Khabarovsky Krai, in the far, far Russian east, currently about 30,000 hectares are burning, which is quite a bit. Just the start of the season. We're just getting warmed up. So I have full faith in climate change and the scale of the Russian wilds, that those fires are going to grow much, much larger. We also have 10 fires in the Amurskaya Oblast, varying sizes. Not really sure on that. I saw 10 fires as a report, but I'm assuming, yeah, they're decently sized. And then in the Irkutskaya Oblast, near the city of Bratsk, in that region, over 200 buildings have already been destroyed. So we got flooding going on in, I suppose you could say, Western Siberia. And then when you hit Eastern Siberia into the Russian Far East, it's already burning. So shaping up to be just a lovely, lovely set of like natural disasters this year. We also had like the freezing in January where all the pipes burst. If you forgot about that, that wasn't all that long ago. And then, yeah, right? Remember at the start of the video, I was outside 9th of May in a coat and a hat. There's snow on the ground. That wasn't just Moscow. A lot of the European part of Russia, in fact, most of it got hit with unseasonably cold weather. And seeing as how it's May, that's not good. And it has decimated agriculture in some parts. So specifically, the Lipetskaya Oblast has declared a state of emergency. Farmers are scrambling to do something with these crops that have recently been put into the ground, recently seeded. And there are even companies right now already warning that there is likely going to be an up to 30% increase in price for children's food and drinks, because local producers of apples and strawberries are basically up the creek. So yeah, it has not been a good year for weather. I would say that there's usually just like a mess of stuff throughout the year. Don't get me wrong, but this year seems really kind of unusual in that regard. Just a lot happening all at once. Now, I mentioned floods already, but I do want to go back to the city of Orsk, which was the epicenter in the Orenburgskaya Oblast when it came to the flooding. there, things are, again, pretty much back to normal. The mayor has stated that the levees for the city are going to be completely rebuilt by winter. So, start of May, reasonably, they have about half of a year to rebuild the levee system, which failed them. And if I remember correctly, one of the reasons that the levee failed was that they speed ran through like critical infrastructure projects, and that like it just like was poorly constructed and it wasn't maintained properly. So like I know they need to put something into place before the next season, but maybe attempting to do all of it in half a year is not the best plan. I don't know. I'm not an engineer. I don't build levees, but that's just how it seems to me. That was the first reaction I had to that piece of news. Maybe if there is a levee engineer watching this video, you can explain in the comments how easy it is to build them and why we could all be building levees over the course of half a year. Or maybe that's not the case, and there probably aren't any levee engineers watching this video. Moving along, I have to mention too that the 5th of May was Easter here in Russia, or for those who are of the Russian Orthodox Church. That has to do with the Julian and the Gregorian calendar, and then it gets even more messed up. Like obviously, Christmas is 2 weeks off because of the Julian Gregorian calendar, but then Easter is even more messed up because Easter is based on the moon cycles. So it's like it's just a mess. Sometimes they're on the same day, sometimes they're a week or two off, and sometimes like this year they're more than a month apart. Anyway, there were some fun stats connected to Easter, which I always like sharing stats from official government organizations that produce the surveys. So what we have about Easter is that a third of Russians don't actually know what the holiday is about. Okay, fair. I mean, there are a lot of Muslims here, so we'll let that say. 67% of Russians believe that Easter is just a tradition, right? That 30% think it's just a cultural tradition, 24% think it's just a family tradition, and then 10% think it is a formal tradition, which I'm not really sure what that is, but it's okay. We'll let them have it. But what I found most interesting is that among Russians who claim to be of, the Orthodox faith, who claim to be Orthodox Christians, only 10% of them actually go to church on Easter, which means that the total percentage of Russians who actually go to church on Easter is 8% of the population. So, fun statistic to just keep in mind when you hear another round of discussion with regards to Christian nation, traditional values, blah, 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 blah. On paper, maybe. In practice, maybe not. Okay, so I'm going to take a timeout right now, and I'm going to use this as a little bit of a carte blanche. I'm going to give it to myself, because if you're watching this, and you're actually going to watch it all the way through, good for you. Number of videos, I've had people just type comments below the video where it almost like they didn't watch the video. They just looked at the thumbnail, listened to the first 30 seconds, and then slammed on their keyboard with their forehead until they produced just like bile and vitriol. So if you watch it this far and you think I only focus on negative news, then I would ask you to give me an example of some positive news from here in Russia. That's not like first channel war propaganda, okay? Like that's not my thing. I'm not covering that nonsense, so that immediately gets sort of just kicked out. If you can share some positive news, that would be great. I would love to see it, and I would be happy to highlight it the next time around. However, if you don't have anything and, you're just watching this video and, this is the news. I've been reading it. You haven't. If you want to go ahead and read the news and find something good, send it my way. Otherwise, shut the hell up and let's get back to the video. Okay, so let's talk about new news. How about that, right? A lot of the older stuff, but let's get into some newer non-headline stories. So one of those is that a new law has been passed in which foreign agents can no longer hold public office, and this will prevent pretty much anyone who is not a pro-Kremlin cheerleader from running. But more importantly, and what a lot of people didn't realize when the law was passed, is that it basically means that the government can now easily remove anybody from office. They can just simply apply the foreign agent label to them, which requires no proof. They literally just put your name on the register, and that's it, you're a foreign agent. And so what this means is that anybody who works in the government and who wants to keep their seat or keep their position, they're basically on a much, much shorter leash. It will be interesting to see if there's any sort of dissent among the politicians or even with their opinions in the near future. Theoretically, you can fight the foreign agent status in a court, and once it is applied to you, public servants will have half a year to have it taken off them in court, but it's impossible. It's only been done once. Only one person has successfully had the foreign agent status removed from them, so I don't think it's realistic for the vast majority of people. Last week, the Ministry of Internal Affairs, which is kind of like the police, FSB, those types of agencies, they placed Zelensky, former President Poroshenko, and some other high-ranking Ukrainian officials on their wanted list, something that they had previously done with the Estonian Prime Minister Kallas. People saw this as kind of a Russian reaction to Putin being placed on the wanted list by the International Criminal Court. But within a few days, those wanted cards were taken down. According to sources, they were originally put up by Ministry of Internal Affairs people in Donetsk, and that it wasn't until a few days later that the head office actually noticed it, which is an interesting way of running a bureaucracy. But a lot of other people were quick to point out, though, that the friends of Russia, Belarus and Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and other countries like that, they're not a big fan of Russia doing this sort of like, well, we're going to ignore head of state immunity because we can do that. They just don't really like that all that much. You know, maybe they're worried that the Russian authorities might detain their head of state on a whim. I don't know. Regardless, it's not a good thing. And they took the wanted cards down, but it was just really weird. It was just like a really weird and kind of like petty. I don't know. It was just an odd thing. But it did make waves. People paid attention because just like, okay, like put Biden up there then, or like just put up a bunch of political leaders that you don't like on the wanted list. And you know, it's like when you go to a theme park and you go to like the old West Town and it's like wanted $100, and it's just a fun time, I suppose, for a few days. But moving along, Nadezhda Kivarkova, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, a journalist was arrested for justifying terrorism because of posts she made online in 2018 and 2020 that were about positive aspects of the Taliban. Mind you, the Taliban is a terrorist organization which enjoys warm relations with the Kremlin, and it regularly sends representatives to official Russian state events. And Kivarkova also got in trouble for a repost of a deceased journalist's article in support of Palestine, which is a region that also has support of the Kremlin. And like the Kremlin even allows there to be protests in support of Palestine and solidarity with them. And the Kremlin has also accepted refugees from Palestine. So she posted articles in 2018 and 2020 about the Taliban, which the Kremlin likes, the terrorist organization, which the Kremlin likes, and Palestine, which is like a nation state that the Kremlin also likes. She got in trouble for posting articles, I guess, positive about those two groups. Okay. Anyway, the crime, like I said, is connected to those posts from 4 to 6 years ago. Ignoring the absurdity of the what was in the actual posts, let's talk about the time, because 4 to 6 years ago it's a long time ago, right? The police have basically said that there is no statute of limitations for internet crimes, right? Which is kind of funny because murder, rape, robbery, all of those crimes have a statute of limitations, right? So that would mean that posting things on the internet is a more serious crime than killing someone. I guess just don't ever write anything or share any opinions, because if the Kremlin does decide to change its mind 10 years from now, 20 years from now, they'll be able to go back and look at what you wrote in the past and then arrest you for that if they decide that's what they want to do. It's also kind of funny because I remember all those times in the West with cancel culture, when people who would have written things on Twitter or on social media a decade prior, things that were maybe sexist or a little bit racist or taken out of context, right? And then they got in trouble for it. The first person that comes to mind is James Gunn, the director. And I remember all of the outrage at that, and some of it rightfully so. Specifically, the people being quote-unquote canceled. Russia loves to bring up cancel culture, and that is one of the hallmarks of cancel culture, is like going back and digging stuff up on people that is not really applicable to the current day and time. And then, anyway, so Nadezhdin Kevarkova was arrested and being charged with terrorism for basically just that. Gazprom, the largest company in Russia, so you've probably heard of it, it's also a state-owned company, is sinking. It posted a 630 billion ruble loss last year for the company as a whole, which is a little bit different from the 1.2 trillion profit it made in 2022. Now, currently the debt level of the company is 6.65 trillion rubles, which is more than the entire national wealth fund here in Russia. Gazprom has some problems. Currently, what they're doing is they are selling off properties here in Moscow and across the country, properties that they just don't have any need for. They're attempting to stem the hemorrhaging, but realistically, the cause of this is the loss of the EU market for selling gas to. And I don't think there's any way that they can replace that. I know there's a lot of talk about the Strength of Siberia pipeline that's going to be headed to China, but China's already accepting a lot of gas imports, and gas is not like China's. China does use a lot of gas, to be sure, but China isn't going to replace the European Union. The European Union used a lot of gas, and so Gazprom is not in a good place right now. Vice Premier Marat Husnulin said that 400 million square meters, or 1/7 of all residential spaces across the country, need serious repairs in the near future. We're talking by, I believe, 2030. Quote, residents pretend like they are paying, and we, with that money, pretend that we are making repairs. Now, 40 million square meters will become аварийное жилье, which basically means that it is derelict, it is unfit for habitation. 40 million square meters will become that by 2030, and in order to repair everything, it's going to cost 4 trillion rubles, and that's money that the government currently doesn't have. So, yes, maybe a housing crisis developing, which is kind of wild because the amount of real estate that is always being built, you would seem to think that it might be pretty easy for the government to, I don't know, buy up some of those apartments and shuffle people around, but evidently that's not the case. So again, this is one of those situations that is going to be developing over the next few years, but we actually had a quote from a high-ranking public official in the last week or so about this situation, and it definitely caught my attention because that's one of those things, like 1/7 of all residential space is not in a good place. Coming back to the Ministry of Internal Affairs, remember like the police, FSB, those types of guys, they predict that 2024 will be the 15-year record, at least 15 years, maybe even a longer period of time. It will be a record year for serious crimes. It'll be an increase of 7% from 142 serious crimes last year to 142,000 serious crimes last year to 152,000 serious crimes this year. Now, from 2022 to 2023, there was also an increase in specific serious crimes, those connected to terrorism, abductions, street murders, rapes, beatings. Those all increased in that period of time. This year, we are expecting to see an increase in diversions, which again are, attacks on critical infrastructure, narcotics, terrorists or extremist crimes, and property crimes. So a lot of those are connected to the current situation that Russia is embroiled in, especially the diversion stuff. The terrorism and extremism crimes, this is something that you've probably heard if you've been watching for a while now. This is a charge that can be leveled at pretty much anybody. Again, the journalist who I just talked about a little bit ago, she's also being charged with terrorism, extremism for reposting things. So the fact that serious crimes are on the rise doesn't necessarily mean violent crime, because like reposting stuff on the internet, she's being charged with a serious crime, but that didn't hurt anybody. So serious crime does not equal violent crime. I want to make that clear. The Ministry of Internal Affairs also predicted that there will be an increase in organized crime and just more criminal activity on the basis of nationality, especially with growing anti-migrant sentiment. As to why this is all happening, this is where it kind of gets to be a little fun. So they're going to blame it on the conflict in Ukraine, which, okay, fair. The movement Put Domoi, or Way Home, which is an organization of wives of mobilized soldiers who want their husbands, not just wives, could be mothers as well, who want the men in their lives to come back from the war zone and like not be at war, right? They want them home. They want things to go back to normal. It's kind of against the government, against war. Like that's their position. And they're kind of seen as not a protest organization per se, but they're blaming upset wives and mothers for the increase in crime. They're also blaming the death of Navalny for the increase in crime, which is kind of wild. I'm not really sure how somebody's death is going to lead to an uptick, but sure. And then they also mention that pardoned criminals returning from the war after signing a contract, that maybe would cause an increase in serious crime. I was worried that they might have forgotten that factor. I mean, it seems odd that they wouldn't include it, but it's probably not that important. Like all of those murderers and rapists and whatnot who got pardoned after they signed a 6-month contract to go fight in Ukraine and then were returned back to the social fray. I mean, like that's probably not going to have major implications for crime rates. I wouldn't imagine, right? That would be silly. Okay, and then for real, can we go a week without Tucker Carlson doing an interview with somebody from Russia? The freak this time around was Alexander Dugin, who again, you've heard his name multiple times on this channel before. The interview ran for about 20 minutes. He kind of just repeated the same stuff. He praised Mussolini and Hitler. Cool. And then he flirted around with those types of ideas, like things kind of connected to fascism. He did not shy away from that topic at all. Again, this is a man who supposedly has or had, or his ideas were popular with high-ranking Russian politicians. So just keep that in mind. What I found interesting is that even like far-right American political commentators like Glenn Beck, they weren't having anything to do with the interview. They were kind of going off about how Dugin is kind of a nut job. Even said his ideology leads to fascism. Wild, right? What was interesting, especially for the Russian domestic news market, I suppose, was that the Dugin that you see in the interview with Carlson is almost the complete opposite of what he is here in Russia. Here in Russia, he rants about the need to repress citizens. He talks about how cities should be leveled from the face of the earth. He talks about fascism too, so I mean, like, at least that was the same. But just sort of fun stuff like that. He also talks a lot about, not in these exact terminologies, but a government based around, like, seriously based around Christian ideology, like a religious state type thing. And then in the interview, he didn't talk about repression or destroying cities. Again, he did mention fascism, so okay, fair. And he didn't mention the word God or Christianity a single time. He also rails about Anglo-Saxons constantly, right? And all things connected to the West. He did have something to say about that in the interview, but Tucker Carlson falls pretty squarely into the Anglo-Saxon camp, and he was just having a pleasant little chat there with old Tucker boy. So he loathes these individuals. He loathes what they stand for so much, and then Tucker shows up, and it's all tea time and smiles and just having a little chat in the the Four Seasons, I suppose, here in Moscow. Anyway, ultimately the interview kind of a farce, and it just shows how little Dugin and his ilk actually stick to their guns, right? They don't really actually have any true ideals. They're kind of just focused on spewing fear and hatred and just making as much noise and garnering as much attention as possible. It's kind of disgusting, and I really hope Tucker, like, gets the hell out of Russia or stops making these interviews, or, like, at least contextualizing things a little bit better, because people like Dugin don't need a platform. All right, we're coming up on the end here, which means we are getting to the little rapid fire, the short little stories here. And the first one I want to mention is that a number of regions across Russia here have forbidden migrants from working as taxi drivers, and also forbidden them from having jobs in the logistics sphere, which I'm pretty sure is connected to deliveries. Now, the list of jobs which migrants are allowed to have or not allowed to have is likely to expand. And yeah, anyway, I know Moscow is definitely its own beast here in Russia, but getting rid of all the migrant taxi drivers and couriers, good luck with that. The expectation is that Russian citizens will come and take over the jobs that the migrants did have. But I've heard this explanation before, and my question then is, why aren't the Russians doing those jobs already then? Is it because they don't pay well enough? Then why didn't the payment offered in the first place, why was it so low? I don't see how they're going to get rid of all of the migrants and then just expect that the Russians are going to come in and fill in those jobs. There's a reason the migrants are doing those jobs in the first place. In further out regions, not Russia, not St. Petersburg, not some of the major cities here in Russia, it is wholly possible that there are citizens who will fill in and be able to do most of the work, and that, generally speaking, the number of taxi drivers and the number of delivery people is much, much lower than it is here in Moscow, so the number of replacements would not be so large. We'll have to see. We'll have to see how this experiment goes. We'll have to see what it turns into in the long run. A deputy from the Gosduma, Hinstein, proposed checking any state official, including teachers evidently, checking their sexual orientation before allowing them to take their position. Hinstein said, quote, "I don't see anything with such checks, anything reprehensible or bad. Defending traditional family values is one of the postulates of government politics, and for the people who are going to be doing politics, it is necessary to approach that with a special care. I myself have 2 children, and I definitely was and will be against it, that anyone of the teachers of my sons would be of a non-traditional sexual orientation. Anyway, other politicians immediately shot the idea down. They called it absurd, rightfully so, and they noted that people could just, lie about their sexual orientation or pretend to be heterosexual. I don't really know actually how Hinstein was planning on finding out who was actually gay. Like maybe Hinstein's whole plan was he was going to force all government officials to like have sex in front of them, and he was going to watch them have sex, like heterosexual sex, and then he was going to see if they were like really disgusted by it, and then that's probably his plan. And then he was going to be like, oh, the person was disgusted by that act, so that must mean that they are closeted gay, and that's how he was going to root out closeted homosexuals within the Russian government. So that's some big brain plays right there. So good for him, I guess, on thinking way outside of the box. But I don't think most people are going to let him watch them have sex, and I don't think that's legal. But again, legality here in Russia changes frequently. I'm sure they could push something through the Duma if necessary. What it is interesting, not interesting, but for last year when they made the LGBT whole thing, when they made that an extremist organization here in Russia, they specifically said that it wasn't going to become a witch hunt and that it wasn't going to affect people's personal lives. And then here we are, where the government is now proposing to work its way into your personal life despite assurances that have been made in the past. So just one of those things to keep in mind. And I know governments do this all over the place, but I'm again dealing specifically with Russia, and assurances made by the Russian government are not something that you can take to the bank. Put it like that. Okay, I already mentioned an increase in crime. This isn't directly connected to that, but there was a man who was sent to prison for, let's say, having very inappropriate contact with an underage boy. He was freed early on the, sign a contract, get out of jail free card. Go to Ukraine, go visit Ukraine, get out of jail free. And he may or may not be receiving a military award for saving his commander. Now, I understand that saving somebody's life, there is like protocol, and that's how that works. But the reason I'm bringing this up, aside from the fact that like it's a wild story of a person who was charged with such a crime is now potentially going to be a decorated war hero. The reason I bring this up is because a few weeks ago, probably 3 weeks ago at this point in time, I was having a conversation with a friend here, and he was telling me how he had recently gone to visit his grandmother. And when he went to visit his grandmother, I don't remember if they were talking or if they saw the man, but it came up that their neighbor had returned. We'll just call him Vanya, because I don't remember what his name was. And my friend was a little surprised because Vanya was serving a very long prison sentence for murder. At least one murder, potentially two murders. And I don't remember who it was, but it was somebody very close to him that he murdered. Anyway, Vanya had signed a contract with the military, and he had served his 6-year term, or not the term, I don't know. He served out his contract because in the early days of the special military operation, convicts could only serve 6 months, or all they had to do was serve 6 months to, I think, maybe a year. And then after that, they were free to go. That loophole got closed up relatively quickly, but still a good number of convicted felons were released through that process. We don't actually know how much because all that was classified information, but moving along with the story. So Vanya is out and about. He's back in the apartment he was in before he was sent to jail for murder. And yeah, now he He's the same psychopath he was before, evidently. My friend was telling me. And his grandmother is like not super pleased. Nobody is actually super pleased with the situation who lives around Vanya. And what's even better is that Vanya, now that he's come back from the war, expects everyone to treat him as a war hero because, as the government has said, you served your country, all of your sins are forgiven. I think even the church says it as such. And so now you're a war hero. Thank you for serving your country. Vanya murdered at least one person. Now, I mean, again, he was off at war, so that body count may be a little bit higher. I'm just bringing it up because the official government position of the soldiers that come back from Russia's special military operation are the people that we want to hand the government over to. These are the future of the country. Not everybody is Vanya. I get that. There's a lot of mobilized people. There's a lot of people who volunteered to go off to it. But there are a lot of people like Vanya. And that disconnect, that dissonance between what the government's trying to sell and what what their real life experiences are in these situations, those are two wildly different things. Anyway, Vanya is out there, and that's not very cool. Earlier this year, the Russian government implemented a ban on gasoline exports, and they are currently discussing lifting it in May and June. They may have already lifted by the time this video comes out. It's almost certainly going to happen, but they just have to get the documents signed. But then the embargo would be brought back in July and August. The reason for that being July and August are kind of peak summer season, so there needs to be a spare supply of gasoline. They can't be selling it off just in case there's some sort of emergencies. And also because in July and August, there are planned repairs to oil refineries on top of repairs that are ongoing from drone attacks. Now, the reason that the embargo was put into place in the first place was because of the drone attacks and the planned repairs. So they needed to build up a little reservoir of fuel that they could then dip into when refineries were shut down. Evidently, they've built up enough supplies, and by selling off some of the gasoline now, the Russian government will be able to earn a little bit of extra money for its coffers. All right, the last piece of news here is about Kanye West. So if you made it all the way through, I'm finishing up with just a juicy one here. Rumors have been flying that Kanye West is coming to Moscow. First, it was yes, and then they said no, and then now it's like a maybe, and maybe he's coming here to introduce his own furniture line. I don't know. It's wild. To be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if Kanye West showed up here in Russia. It would be kind of right on track with his current record of doing just out of left field type of stuff. What I do find funny though is there's a lot of excitement for Kanye showing up here, and I'm sure he would get some of the star treatment, but I thought the Kremlin was against people who love Hitler, right? Like that's their whole position right now. That like we gotta go against the people who are keeping the dream of fascism and Nazism alive. From what I remember, Kanye does love Hitler.
I see good things about Hitler also.
But then again, Dugin's a fan of him too, so what are you gonna do? Anyway, we'll see if Kanye comes. I certainly don't care. Does anybody care about Kanye anymore? Maybe. But just such an oddball story, and it was such a... The Russian society here is so starved for any sort of Western stars. And I know people are going to maybe gripe at me in the comments, just like, well, Russia has its own stars and its own celebrities and stuff. But since COVID hit, that's it. There have been no musicians. There have been no outside of Russia celebrities who have come to Russia. So Kanye showing up would be momentous. It would be kind of wild. All right, that's it. That is all of the news from the last we'll say 2 weeks at this point in time. It was quite a bit. There were some big events. There were some follow-ups. There were a few new news stories. We are now an hour deep into the video. And again, there's not much I can do about it. Like I said, I was off on holiday, so things piled up a little bit. And when I was on holiday, I wasn't reading the news as thoroughly. I was just kind of hitting the highlights every single day. But when I sat down to throw things together once again, I looked at what I had and I realized that, well, crap, we're going to be stuck with another 60 minutes, aren't we? I would do one of those impressions like, this is 60 minutes, but I don't remember the name of any of the geriatrics who used to be on that show or who probably still are on that show. But that's beside the point. I've got a few other videos that I will hopefully be getting out in the next week or so. I want to get out. The weather has turned around in Moscow. Most of the snow has melted and it is relatively warm again. So I plan on going out and doing a little vlog and talking about myself in the city and why I'm here and blah, 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 blah. Who knows? Some of you might find it interesting. I mean, probably. And then, yeah, we're going to have another little music video coming up here real soon. Don't know why I'm laying this all out for you here. It's just eating up time in the video, which is already ungodly long. But yeah, anyway, if you made it this far, as always, just like congratulations. You should get a little chart with the gold stars. And then that way, for every video that you sit all the way through, you can kind of, like every 5th video, you get a cookie or something. I'm not going to give you the cookie, but you could reward yourself for patience in listening to me go on for as long as I do. It doesn't have to be 5. You set the cookie limit yourself. It could be more if that's your thing. It could be less if that. You could just get a cookie every single time you get a gold star. Or a gold star is sufficient if you're motivated internally. I want to thank you all for watching. It is nice. It's nice to see the comments. Most of them, the ones that are like kind of not super negative or attacky or things like that, I do my best to delete those for the most part, or like give them a few days to respond. And if they don't respond, then I get rid of them. And yeah, I'm glad some of you out there are watching the videos and some of you are enjoying them. And, you know, if you do like the video, leave it a like. Leave a comment, like kind of a nice one. Again, I'm going to delete the negative and attacking style ones. Share it. Sharing is caring, right? So do that as well. And yeah, you'll be seeing more of me, perhaps more of me than you would like in the near future. But that's kind of how YouTube works, right? It's the churn. So that's all the news I have for you at this junction. This has been Russia in Context. Thanks for watching.